Red Line Logbook here for D. Gray Man saying goodbye to Alan Walker Arc, Part 2. And we're starting off where we left off, where Rhoda is being devoured by the Noah inside of her. She continues to lecture Cross about the fact that as someone who didn't experience the end of the world, he wouldn't know a thing. He wouldn't understand the agony of it. And his remark is, well, so your plan is to then destroy this world as a result of that agony? And she's like, yes, that's the whole reason why this world was created in the first place. Cross, of course, mocks this mindset, but he decides it's not worth arguing with some ghost that's been dead for thousands of years. And so Cross decides he's going to reason with Rhoda instead. He tells her that she's a human of this world as well. There's no reason for her to be possessed by this Noah. She can fight it. Do everything she can to find her own salvation. And Rhoda's response to that is, fine, then just kill me. She begins to cry and then disappears, leaving Cross to continue to watch over Mana and Alan by himself. Back at the circus, Alan's back doing chores. Cosmo is once again being fucked with by another member of the circus, basically being told he's going to slowly be replaced by Mana soon, because the ringmaster clearly sees that Mana's more popular with families and a better moneymaker. This, of course, pisses off Cosmo to the point where he punches the guy, and this continues to feed into Cosmo's fear of being replaced, but at the same time, his just insane rage towards Mana. And we already know where this ends based on previous flashbacks, so Cosmos is going to continue to just rile up until he snaps. As for Alan, while he's currently washing all of the clothes and equipment and everything, that's when Mana's dog decides to play with him. Alan's getting annoyed because he has to work, but this dog keeps jumping all over him and it's making it harder and harder. He's about to smack him and yell at him, but the dog's so cute that Alan can't do it. Alan is then ordered to wash all the clothes, which kind of sucks because he has to do that outside in a scrub pan, and it's snowing, so it is cold and he's working with water. That's when the dog decides to snuggle up against him, and the two start to feel warm. Alan then thinks to himself that he's actually felt this warmth before, this idea of someone just holding him tight and keeping him safe. But he can't really figure out the feeling because he's lost his memories of his past. He doesn't remember anything. He doesn't even remember his name. While Alan ponders his forgotten memories, Cosmo then starts to approach dog food and a bottle of poison. Obviously, they're to kill Mana's dog. Right before he approaches them, he actually bumps into Apocryphus. Apparently, he's also there just monitoring the Millennium Earl. Apocryphus apologizes and just walks away. Cosmos doesn't really care that there's a random priest just walking around the circus. He's completely focused on killing this dog. And so he walks up to Alan and the dog. Alan assumes he's there to pick on him because that's what Cosmos does all the time. But he says, no. I love dogs. I just wanted to feed him. And he starts to offer the food to Mana's dog. But that is when Alan notices something out of place. He realizes Cosmos isn't actually smiling. It looks like he's smiling because of the clown makeup, so he's got a permanent smile painted on, but his actual mouth is just static. He's completely emotionless at this moment. Alan realizes that he does not care about this dog, in fact, quite the opposite, and he immediately smacks the dog food away. Cosmos then starts to beat the shit out of Alan. He grabs the dog food that was knocked on the ground and starts to shove it into the dog's mouth. Alan actually just charges Cosmos and bites his hand to stop that from happening. Cosmos then starts to strangle Alan to unconsciousness, and while he's passing out, he sees the dog bite Cosmo on his arm, and he watches as Cosmo starts to beat the dog. When Alan is woken up by the old man, who is also part of the clean crew, he realizes the dog is gone and immediately starts running around looking for him, thinking that Cosmos probably killed him. But when he sees that he's currently performing on stage with Mana to a massive audience, he realizes the dog got away. After the performance, the dog runs up to Alan. Alan expresses how happy he is that he's safe, and he really begins to get closer with the dog. That is until he's kind of embarrassed that he is becoming emotional, and he tries running off. At the same time this is happening, the ringmaster is currently yelling at Cosmos for screwing up his performance. It's revealed the reason why Cosmos couldn't do his act properly is because his arm is completely bandaged up after he was bit by the dog. Absolutely his fault. I mean, he tried to murder a dog and then a child. Alan then sees Cosmos just fuming in the back after he was scolded and basically threatened with demotion and basically ready to murder the dog and Alan. Alan then tells the dog, okay, up till Christmas, you need to always stick with your master. Be safe, because after that, we're going to leave this town because we're traveling circus, and your master's probably going to find work somewhere else. So until then, you just need to watch out. Alan then realizes that means he's going to be separate from this dog, and he actually begins to feel sad. It licks his hand, and this causes Alan to finally break and hug the dog and realize that he actually does care about it. The next day, Alan sees Mana currently digging a grave for his dog. What he can't hear is Mana's internal thoughts, where he's trying to hold back his tears, he's trying to hold back all the grief, because Mana knows that if he grieves, the Millennium Earl will come. And Mana then starts to apologize to the dog named Alan, and he tells Alan that he's sorry he couldn't even grieve for him. He then starts to remember the first time he ever met Alan the dog. He was an old dog whose previous owner died before he did, and so Mana felt a kinship with him because his brother Nia recently died. So he decided to take the dog in so the two of them could ease their loneliness. And as that's happening, his grief begins to start to take over, and what appears to be innocence starts to activate in Mana's body. His hands begin to sprout into the things that very much look like innocence, and then he gets a hold of himself. He says, I'm not grieving, I'm not grieving, I'm not grieving, and the innocence disappears. He then continues digging the grave, saying he's returned to the helix of life. That's where all life goes after they die, and there he'll reunite with the one he was looking for. This is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Like he's doing everything in his power to just not break at this moment as he slowly buries Alan the dog. And that's when Mana realizes he's alone again. And he says to himself, I'll just keep walking. That's when Alan the human walks over and asks if the dog really is dead. Mana's like, yes. He finishes burying him. Alan's like, Cosmos did it. He's jealous of you. So what are you going to do? And Mana's response is, there's nothing I can do. If I attack Cosmos, I'll be kicked out of the circus and I won't be able to make any money through the winter. Alan, in his internal thoughts, is basically like, oh, so you're also a piece of garbage who cares more about gold than he does another's life. He kind of feels disappointed because he assumed if the dog was such a kind creature, then his master must have been too. Of course, Alan doesn't understand that Mana is suppressing all of his pain at the moment. We then get caught up to the flashback that we saw last time, where Alan asks, aren't you actually sad? And Mana pretends to hang himself and says, oh, I'm so sad I could die. Of course, Alan gets mad at this like he did in the last flashback, but in this one, we get a little more context where Alan realizes at that moment, no, Mana really is crying. He just can't do it physically at this moment. Alan doesn't understand why he can't do it physically, but he knows inside Mana is breaking apart. Alan then starts thinking of the dog. He thinks of Mana not crying for the dog, and this whole thing starts to break him apart. Alan then asks, what is the dog's name? But he's just like, why does it matter? And then he just continues just stewing the pain until eventually Alan starts crying. Mana then walks over to Alan, hugs him, and says, thank you for crying for Alan. The narration, which is Alan telling this story to Gonda, says this is the first time he ever cried for another being. But the part that Alan did not know about is that Apocryphus was actually watching this whole time. And Apocryphus seems kind of happy about this. He straight up says that these two are fated to always meet, and that the boy there will eventually be the downfall of the Millennium Earl. And when that happens, the wielder of the heart will be revived. The next day, Alan wakes up in the middle of town square, because Mana was told to go out and hand out flyers like he did last time. But this time he decided, since he doesn't have his dog with him, he'd take Alan. So he's just messing with Alan the entire time, basically trying to teach him how to be a clown. Alan's getting frustrated and angry about all of this. But the entire time, Mana is just there trying to cheer Alan up, trying to be a good man. He tries placing Alan on a bouncing ball, but he falls off, of course, because he has no training. So Mana grabs him, puts him on his shoulder, jumps onto the bouncing ball himself, and then starts to dance and tells Alan to smile, because this is their stage that was brought together by tragedy. Cross sees this, and he is not happy, because Mana is the Millennium Earl, and he's lost his memories, and so he is in the most vulnerable position he could possibly be in. This is the best chance for the heart to kill the Millennium Earl. But the one that Cross needs to kill the Millennium Earl is Nia. And so Cross for years now has eliminated anyone who is a possible threat to his mission. And he means anyone. And he's about to kill Alan. Alan and Mana are completely unaware of this, of course. They're just putting on their show. Alan is worried that he might be messing it up by being there, but Mana assures him, no, just keep smiling. Trust me, I'm a professional. And he does a few moves, a few magic tricks that makes people happy and smile and clap, and Alan begins to really like Mana more and more. When the performance is done, Alan then starts holding out the hat for some money, and the hat just quickly fills up with cash. It is completely full in a matter of seconds because the whole crowd loves the act. That's when Cross walks up, and he asks Alan, what is your name? Alan, of course, doesn't know his name. He doesn't remember it. He doesn't have a name. And so he just stares blankly at Cross. Cross then asks him, is it Alan? This, of course, angers Alan because Alan's the dog's name, and he basically just screams no at Cross. Alan then just starts glaring at Cross. Cross then drops some coins into the hat and says, beat it then. If anything happens to Mana, I'll kill you. Alan's confused and says, who the heck is Mana? And then Mana says, yes. Alan goes, what? You called me. I was like, no, I didn't. He's like, yes, you did. I'm Mana. Alan then puts two together and goes, oh, well, then you have a really creepy stalker. And Mana's like, well, what do you mean? Well, there's this guy dressed as a priest, but he's clearly up to no good. And he told me to stay away from you. And then that's when Mana then starts acting kind of erratic. He goes, Nia. And he then charges through the crowd where Alan was pointing. Alan then chases after Mana, but he's not stopping no matter how much Alan calls out to him. Mana then runs to the road as a carriage is about to hit him. Alan drops all the money, grabs Mana, and drags him out of the way before he gets run over. Alan then demands, what the hell is wrong with you? Do you have a death wish? What's going on? And so Mana says, okay, let's talk over there. So they sit down. He begins to remove the makeup from his face, and he tells Alan that he's actually looking for his twin brother. Alan then starts yelling at Mana, saying, the guy couldn't have been your twin brother. He doesn't look like you. He's way younger. And then Mana's like, okay, how old do you think I am? Alan says 60. Personally, I think he looks more like he's in his 40s, but neither is correct. He claims he's 17. Alan's like, yeah, I'm not going to believe that's such a horrible joke. It's not funny. And he calls Mana Gramps. Mana then gets really sad by the fact that he's being called Gramps. Alan can't have him looking at him with sad eyes, so he goes, okay, fine, you're 17. Mana then gets all cheery. Mana then explains that he has no idea what happened, because he was 17, and then when he went to bed and woke up, he had the face of an old man. It was crazy. Not just that, but he's actually taller now than he used to be. He really doesn't get it. It was all a shock in his eyes. Alan's like, yeah, you're clearly just messing with me now. And then he explains that he always had a brother with him as well, but when he woke up, he didn't just have a different face. His brother was missing, and so he's searching for him. But he's got to be careful because he's on the run. He's being hunted down. Alan's like, wait, you're being hunted by who? And Mana goes, well, it's this Earl of the Millennium. He's able to turn humans into demons. In fact, there are demons everywhere, so you got to watch out. And that's when Alan begins to realize this guy's messed up in the head. Like, he couldn't cry for Alan before, and right now he's mixing up his delusions with reality. Like, this guy is broken. He's a broken man. And so Mana explains because he now looks like an old man, his brother would never recognize him. And so he became a performer so he could travel the world trying to find his brother. Alan, being the rude little kid that he is, says, well, how do you know your brother didn't just run off and ditch you? Alan immediately regrets what he just said, and he then tries to take it back, explaining that that's what happened to him. His family abandoned him, his family sold him to the circus, so he's just projecting onto Mana's family, his brother, what happened to him, and he's just trying to just apologize the best he can. Mana then looks at the sunset and says, isn't it beautiful? I love this world. Even if it gives me nothing in return, I will always love it. And he tells Alan, once you learn to love something, your path will open up for you. And he believes that this will happen to Alan one day. While enjoying the sunset, the two then realize that the circus starts up its performance at sunset. And so that means the two of them are late. And so they just start sprinting towards the circus. At the circus, that's where Cosmos is basically cursing at the dog, because even though he killed it, this didn't really affect Mana's popularity as a clown. And on top of that, his arm is still, injured, so his performance is going down. So he feels like he's fucked. He's currently being watched by Tim Campy, who then immediately gets stabbed in the back by Apocalypse. The reason for this is because Tim Campy only records with his eyes, and so if he gets stabbed in the back and destroyed, he can't record Apocalypse's appearance. Apocalypse knows that Tim Campy will regenerate, so he's got to move fast, and so he immediately then starts to brainwash the entire circus. The brainwashing is very simple. Everyone now believes that Red, aka Alan, is the one that killed Mana's dog, and that he deserves punishment. When Alan and Mana finally make it back to the circus, Mana realizes that there's no customers, the ticket booth isn't even open, and everything's dark. It's weird. Alan's like, there's no time for that. We need to go. He pushes Mana through, and Mana's right. It's just nothing. That is until the ringmaster approaches. The ringmaster grabs Alan and drags him through the curtain into the main arena where everyone else is at. Mana's like, no, it's my fault we're late. Don't punish him. But that's not what they're doing. Alan and Mana then realize what's happening as soon as they see the dead body of Alan the dog. Cosmo dug the dog back up and basically planted it in front of everyone. And Alan, of course, is pissed off at this, that he would violate the dog's grave, as Alan is about to basically attack Cosmo. That's when the ringmaster says, this was your doing, Red. You're the one who killed Granville's dog. Alan is surprised to hear this completely, and the ringmaster says, why? Did you think that you could replace him? Get yourself out of being chore boy? Obviously, Alan is pissed off, saying that he didn't do it, and it was Cosmos, but That's when the ringmaster pulls out a vial of poison and says, "We found this in your bed." Cosmos then starts to bloviate, saying how he tried to help. He tried to do right by the kid, but he just couldn't control him, and eventually Alan just killed the dog. Now, here's the thing. This does sound like something that Cosmos would do, just to be a bastard. But you gotta remember, everyone's been brainwashed by Apocrypha, so even Cosmos actually believes what he's saying. He legitimately believes that he's been this good guy this whole time, and that Alan killed the dog. Alan tries to defend himself, plead his case, said it was Cosmos who did this, but no one's listening. And eventually he just sees Cosmos' smiling face, and that causes Alan to snap, and this is the first time he activates his innocence. Everyone freaks out, they start running away, Alan attacks Cosmos. Mana senses what's happening and rushes over, saves Cosmos' life at that moment, and basically begs Alan to stop, that killing someone is wrong, that it just brings sorrow. He hugs Alan, and Alan says, "Why? Why stop me? You're always crying. You're crying right now." Mana then thanks Alan for crying for him and says, "It's okay. We'll just leave. Together. We'll just leave together." But Alan's rage can't be quenched with just these few words. He actually gets angrier and angrier, and he ends up grabbing Mana's face with his innocence. And since Mana is the Millennium Earl, Alan's innocence begins to burn away at Mana and destroy him. And that's when we see that Apocryphus is actually the one really activating Alan's innocence at this moment, and is basically forcing it to destroy the Millennium Earl at this moment, or at least trying to. And so Alan is just giving into his grief and to Apocryphus' influence, and he's just beginning to burn away at Mana till eventually he sees nothing but a monster in front of him and thinks to himself, if he destroys this thing in front of him, will that bring back the dog? But fortunately for Alan, Mana saves him, including himself at this moment, because he's not angry or hateful at Alan for trying to kill him at this moment. Instead, he just holds him tight and tells him, "Thank you for loving Alan, but do not grieve, because grieving brings forth the Millennium Earl." And at that moment, the psyche of Mana cracks and he falls unconscious. And from his shadow comes the Millennium Earl. This is most likely just the costume that he wears, because Mana is still just lying there unconscious. But the costume still possesses the will of the Millennium Earl. And at that moment, every audience member inside the circus stands up and transforms into an Akuma. The Millennium Earl costume then begins to wrap around Alan, starting to crush him. And while that's happening, the Akuma then just slaughter everyone. They start firing their guns, just blowing off people's heads left and right. Every member of the circus is completely shot dead. Cosmos is the last one, realizing that this is how he's going to die, and he's just riddled with holes. He actually survives being shot, but of course the Akuma poison eventually breaks him down to dust. Next thing that happens is the Akuma then start dying. Bullets start hitting them, and they start exploding. It's Cross. He then stares at the Millennium Earl costume and says, "How depraved can you be? Do you really want Mana that much? Not gonna happen." And he starts just blasting every Akuma in there. After killing all the Akuma, then Cross talks to the Earl suit and tells it to just go away. Mana's not desperate enough yet. And without him, you're nothing but an empty shell. It glares at Cross with rage, but accepts the reality, and then just deteriorates back into Mana's shadow. Cross then runs over to Mana, see how he's doing. He's trying to figure out what happened. Is it injury to his body, maybe to his soul? But what Cross figures out is that it's his memories. Alan's innocence damaged Mana's memories. He was planning on helping him out, but then another Akuma appears. It wraps up Mana, says that it's going to take the Earl away and kill him itself, also devour the boy that damaged the Earl, all that, but Cross is like, yeah, that's not happening, and just casually kills this Akuma. After all the Akuma are dead, Cross then grabs Alan and throws him against a wall. This wakes Alan to a gun in his face, where Cross then demands, "What did he do to Mana?" Alan says, "I don't know what you're talking about." And over again, Cross continues to demand what Alan did, but Alan is confused and has no idea what's going on. Cross clearly doesn't want to kill a child, but he's putting his mission first no matter what. And so right before he blows Alan's head clean off, that is when Tincampy, finally regenerated, tackles Cross. Tincampy then tries to swallow Cross's gun. Cross is pissed off, tries pulling him off, because his number one goal right now is to fulfill his mission, and his mission, if necessary, is to kill this child. And he does not care what Tincampy does. He's going to kill Alan. But that is when Maria jumps on his back. He gets a flashback of who I'm assuming Maria used to be before she was a corpse, puppeted by innocence. And this seems to calm Cross's heart, and he allows Alan to live. He actually tells him just to go away, don't go anywhere near Mana again. Right before Alan leaves, he then takes Alan the dog with him, and he buries him back in his grave. As he's doing this, he's just crying uncontrollably. because he's at a point where he now believes that the reason why he was abandoned by his parents and left to this circus is because he's a monster and he has no right to live. He has no right to have anything. Alan is just falling apart at this point. His only wish at this point is to basically die, and he just cries himself to sleep in the snow. And Alan would have died here, but it seems that Apocalypse has different plans. He decides, no, you must dedicate your life and sacrifice it all for the heart. As such, this is only the beginning. And shortly after this, Alan is then discovered by the police, most likely sent by Apocalypse. The police lock down the entire circus where they're trying to find all of the missing individuals because all they find are their clothes. That's because after you've been killed by an Akuma, you turn to dust. They asked Alan if he knows anything, but Alan doesn't answer. He just continues to stare blankly. Alan's intent was to die in the snow there with the dog, but once again, Apocalypse saved him. But Alan doesn't know that, and so Alan just assumes the only reason why he survived not freezing to death is because he's a monster. Alan is then broken out of his haze when he sees Mana and rushes towards him, screaming his name. Mana then hugs him and says, Alan, where have you been? And the police officer who's watching after Alan runs after him and says, oh, you're the boy's father? That's good. By the way, you should be more careful. He was sleeping out in the snow earlier. And Mana then goes, Alan, how could you do that? It's cold. Oh my gosh. And he starts to hug him, try to warm him up. After the police officer is satisfied the kid is safe, he decides to go off to deal with the missing persons case, leaving Alan and Mana alone. Alan's like, okay, so now where should we go? I heard the South has good food. Let's go there. And Alan's trying to apologize. He's trying to ask Mana what happened last night. He's really confused, but he then begins to realize there's something wrong with Mana, especially when Mana says, why have I been wandering around lately? Alan goes, what are you talking about? You were searching for your little brother. You told me that. And Mana looks at Alan and says, who's that? That's when Alan realizes when he touched him with his innocence, he destroyed Mana's memories. Alan then starts to freak out. He starts to beg Mana to remember his little brother, to remember the fact that he was so desperate to meet him that he almost got ran over by a cart. He's trying to get Mana to remember, but all of it just goes over his head. Mana then starts talking about the snow, saying, it's going to be a white Christmas. Lovely, isn't it? Alan then takes full responsibility for breaking Mana and asks him to take him with him, telling him that he will remember everything. Everything Mana has forgotten, Alan will carry with him. Mana says, of course, you'll always be with me, and the two just head off together. Cross and Road are both watching this as it's happening. Cross is confused because that can't be Alan. If that were the real Alan, he'd be an adult well into his 40s at this point. But if that boy really is the host for the 14th, then he's going to have to send that child to his death, and Cross is just broken about that. Road, on the other hand, is confused that the Millennium Earl and an exorcist are now traveling together. And so Mana and Alan's journey begins. And it begins on a very sad note where Mana then looks at Alan and says, you know, Alan, when did you get so big? And when did you lose your tail? But you know, it's still nice that we can hold hands now. And of course, Alan accepts this as the tragedy of their story and says, yeah, it is nice. Alan and Mana then continue to travel together as Mana's memories and mind begins to fail him further until eventually he dies in his sleep. In the present, Alan then tells Gonda he wasn't sick or anything like that. It was Alan who killed him. He destroyed his memory and slowly he rotted away from the inside out. Then Alan turned him into an Akuma and then exorcised him, killing him all over again. At the end of the story, Gonda then just looks at Alan and asks, Mana's grave, are you sure he's actually buried there? Can I check? And as you can imagine, this immediately starts a fight between the two of them, just as Johnny and Tidal show up. So Tidal then has to separate the two of them and then drag them back to one of his hideouts. Tidal then asked for them to explain why they were fighting in the middle of the street, and basically the argument starts over again, where Alan is pissed off that Gonda wants a grave rob Mana. Gonda has a good point, which is, are you sure he's dead? Alma was alive. Sometimes we just perceive things the way we want to and not as they are. He then points out multiple truths, one being the fact that the Millennium Earl was after him, 2, that Cross was willing to kill Alan to protect Mana, and 3, he was brothers of the 14th. Mana is basically the gray zone in between this holy war, and they need to know who he really was and if he really is dead. Alan can't argue, because this whole time he's had doubts about Mana and this whole thing, but he's always pushed those doubts back. He's always removed them because he doesn't feel like he has any right to doubt Mana. Alan then searches his feelings, he goes through it all, and eventually he decides, okay, fine, I will finally keep the promise that I made to Mana. He will finally be the one to hold on to all of Mana's memories. And so he decides he's going to learn everything about Mana, even the things he didn't want to know. And Alan finally does what he should have done from the very beginning. He asks for their help. And without hesitation, they all agree to help him. Tidal then says, okay, now can you tell me about this human-formed innocence? And Johnny's like, yeah, I also want to know about that. But Conda's like, no, wait. We have to wait for one more person. And he just yells out the window for the bastard to come. Link then jumps from the roof onto the balcony and basically just says hi. Alan, not knowing that Link was alive, jumps on him and starts crying, basically saying he's sorry over and over again about having to abandon him. Link is confused because he had his memories changed by Apocryphus, so he's like, wait, what do you mean by that? And then he remembers what Cromwell said. He asked him if he saw anything else. And so, they finally have their meeting where Alan explains everything that's going on with Apocryphus, Cross, Mana, the 14th, everything. And when it's all done, Link is completely surprised that everything that he thought happened to Alan was a complete lie. In fact, it was Apocryphus that killed him, not the Noah. But what makes it even more concerning is the fact that Apocryphus does not discriminate against Akuma, Noah, or people when it comes to protecting the heart. Everyone is fair game to slaughter. And the worst part is, innocence doesn't work on him. In fact, he's able to take over another person's innocence and use it against them. Which means when it comes to Apocryphus, all exorcists are bound and chained, with no way of fighting back. Link and Conda say they don't care, they're just gonna kick its ass anyway. But then Johnny points out, didn't you already lose? Tidal says, okay, well clearly, the church knows about Apocryphus, even though it wants to keep it all secret from us. So, me and Connor are going to go back to the Order, and the two of us are then going to uncover the secret of who Apocryphus is, because it's clear that he's the greatest clue to where the heart is at. And if we can get the heart, we will win this war. Alan then goes, okay, you two can do that. I'm going to do as my master told me. I'm going to go to the Graham Bell mansion to find Katerina. And he asks Johnny to go with him. Johnny, of course, says he'll absolutely go. It's his job as the science team to support exorcists, after all. And that's when they all ask, okay, Link, what are you going to do? Link then just reveals the truth, that his sole mission is to basically protect the 14th. He's doing this solely so he can save Cromwell. For the last 100 years, Cromwell's bloodline have basically been slaves to the church, unable to decide their own destiny. And Link wants to save him from that. He wants to free Cromwell from these chains. And so, he tells Alan, I will help you until you are gone, and the 14th takes over, and then I will serve the 14th. Now, I expect Alan to be disgusted by this and to reject him outright, but Alan doesn't. He says, alright, I'm happy to have you along. After a day of rest, their plan is to then split up into their two groups. Alan is actually the first to wake up. He goes to the bathroom to wash up his face, and in the mirror, that's when he talks to Nia. Nia's excited he's going to go look for Katerina, because he wants Alan to remember everything that happened 35 years ago, and the vow he made to Nia. He then reveals to Alan that his body, his voice, his personality, everything about him was remade. And the only one who could have done that was Apocryphus. And then Nia reveals something even more tragic, that Nia wasn't the one who chose Alan. Alan volunteered to be Nia's new body. And he tells Alan he needs to remember the real him. And the best way to do that is to ask the person that Cross trusted the most. Alan then realizes the one person that could be, and that's the old lady Cross brought Alan to right after Mana's death. Alan then asks the old woman, has she ever heard the name Katerina Eve Graham Bell? And the old lady's like, where did you hear that name? And I was like, from Master in a vision, but it could have just been me going crazy. The old lady thinks to herself, that bastard's still alive. She then explains to Alan that if he ever asked that name, Cross told her to send Alan to a bookstore with an owl as its symbol, and there he must introduce himself using Tim Campy as proof. Alan explains that Tim Campy is, well, dead, but the old lady's like, well, there's nothing else I can say. You're just going to have to figure out the rest on your own. Her last advice is that it's not really a bookstore, and that he shouldn't let his guard down. Alan thanks her, and the two say goodbye, and she clearly is regretting this, because this means it's the end of Alan. This is where he dies. The group then have one last discussion whether or not Alan should go to this bookstore or not. Johnny's kind of nervous because he thinks these people might be allies of the 14th and therefore a threat to Alan. Conda's not concerned. He just thinks Alan can handle any threat that comes at him. He is an exorcist after all. Link has already sworn his loyalty to Alan, and so he'll just follow him anywhere. In fact, if Alan decides to betray the 14th and run away, try to save his memory, save his life, then Link will go along with that as well. And Tidal is just being the dad of the group, trying to make sure everyone is A-okay. They all then make their stop, and they separate. But before they do, Alan thanks Conda one last time, because Alan, better than anyone, knows that this is it for him. This is the end of Alan Walker. Okay, this is the end of the arc, and also the end of every completed arc. The story is still going on, with chapters coming out maybe once a year, so there won't be another video like this for a while. But I do plan on doing more D Gray Man videos. but it's going to be a while. So if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, give a thumbs up so you enjoy more D Gray Man and other many things. Thank you, and have a great day.